Well, let's continue now with our discussion on mental illness. And some people who have depression and other mental illnesses continue to suffer in silence. Now, this is due to stigma and discrimination. So how do we help those around us who actually are in need? Let's discuss this further with clinical psychologist Audrey Katzidzira. Audrey, good morning. Thanks so much for your time. So how much progress have we actually made in understanding mental illness?
I think we've made quite a lot of progress because people are beginning to understand that suicidality has nothing to do with someone just wanting to check out, someone taking the easy way out, but that they are actually at that time depressed, and depression is a disease that can affect you physiologically.
So let's just talk about supporting somebody, or let's just talk about somebody who actually might not even know that this is what they're going through. So what are the signs that we actually need to look out for? What are the things that we need to look out for in ourselves, for one, if it's us, or those around us, a loved one perhaps who might be going through this?
Okay, to make it simple, I normally use the word peas, so like the pea that you would eat, the vegetable. So you look at the psychological aspects. What sort of thoughts are you having? What sort of emotions are you having? Are you having elements of being punished? You know, are you feeling a lot of things that you can't disclose to people? Is there a sense of isolation? Then the word eating, you know, so that would be the E, you know, appetite loss. Are you eating too little or too much? Then you'd also look at your actions, you know, in terms of how you're behaving. Are you starting to change? Are you withdrawing? Are you self-isolating? And then finally, would look at sleep disturbance. So are you sleeping too little or too much? So that's generally what I would look at as a benchmark. And then also when it comes to death in terms of thinking, it's normal as a person to have thoughts around death, you know, just to think of death, what life is. But when you start to think of taking your own life, that's now suicide ideation. So you want to look at that. You want to monitor that spectrum. Am I just having death ideation where I think in terms of what life is, what death is? Or am I now thinking in terms of what can I do to end my own life?
Actually, how do I do this? So let's just also just be clear, Audrey, about how do I know that I'm just not having a bad couple of days, that this is actually something now that actually needs some serious, proper treatment? At what point do we realize this is not just a bad day, not just going through a bad phase, I'm feeling quite terrible just for now, whether it's work, family, friends, or whatever, that it's come to a point where it's become a more, it's a deeper problem?
So the beauty about depressive symptoms is that they're subtle. They manifest differently in different people. So a lot of people will say, okay, I've got the diagnosis of depression, or I've got some depressive symptoms. It's normal to have the low days. But the point where you need to now consider a professional is when you start to do what we call masking. Masking is when you're going around as though you're okay. So people ask you, are you okay? And you say, yeah, I am. But you feel like you're hiding something. And then you also start to have a sense of inadequacy, a sense of feeling worthless, a sense of looking around and comparing yourself. And then you're just not interested in things as much as you used to. Things that you used to enjoy, you don't enjoy. But the primary indicator in a high-functioning person, so we're talking of people that are like you and me, people that are able to go to work, is when you find yourself masking. Then another way, you know, it also ties in with the masking, is when you start self-medicating. So you start to utilize something, normally it's a substance, in order for you to feel better. You're like, hey, if I just get a little bit of this, I'll feel better. That substance could even be as simple as coffee. You know, people say, you know, simple things like, well, if I don't have my coffee, then my day hasn't started. But to what extent do you feel like you need to do something in order for you to feel okay? That's when you need to speak to a professional, particularly when you also hide it from your loved ones, from the people that know you.
And I think, Audrey, the other problem with that is, I mean, many people, yes, have medical aids, or many people can afford to see professionals. Majority of South Africans are unable to pay for such services. We know there are free services as well, things like SADAC, places like that, but how many people have, you know, the sort of access to those services? How many people are able to actually make that contact as well? Is that I would imagine is still quite a major problem for us in helping people deal with this.
Absolutely, but I think it's also about how we socialize one another when it comes to mental illness. I think it's time for us to break that barrier when it comes to socialization, because we think mental health and we think in terms of people that can access healthcare, but the reality is us as practitioners need to become context relevant. So I need to think in terms of who is my community. If my community is someone in the rural areas or someone in the township, then my narrative around what depression has to change. I'm not sure if you've heard of the friendship bench that was started in the southern part of Africa. You know, we had grandmothers who started being trained how to screen depressive symptoms. So I think the barrier is the practitioners themselves in terms of maybe the narratives around what depression looks like, because we don't don't really have to say access to healthcare is for the 1%, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's also about how we talk about it. We need to normalize what symptoms look like, using the community frame of references.
And I think just as a last word, Audrey, for those who think that this is what they might be going through, those who feel, okay, now that I listen to this, the penny has dropped for me, and also for family members, relatives, friends, colleagues around them, what do we need to start doing for people who might be in the state or we suspect? How do we have that conversation with them and say, listen, consider that you might actually need some help?
Absolutely. So I think it's about taking it a step at a time, utilizing our therapeutic community. If you don't have access to your primary GP, a counselor, someone who can screen you for symptoms, then utilize the people around you, break the isolation. The primary indication of someone not feeling okay is self-isolation. And we know that self-isolation has a lot to do with punishment. If you look at institutions, prisons, or mental asylums, when someone has done something, we isolate them because isolating is torture to the human psyche. But when you start to instill that isolation within yourself, where you start to withdraw, already you need to tap into that therapeutic community. So speak to the people around you, open up, force yourself. It may be difficult, but force yourself. Even such things as self-care. Sometimes when you've got depressive symptoms, getting out of bed, just bathing, just grooming yourself is difficult. Force yourself, and I think that's why we also talk of abolition. You start to have a lack of motivation. So just find a way to mobilize, to just come in there and say, I'm not feeling like it, but let me try to act counter to what I'm actually presenting with.
All right, Audrey, thanks very much for that. And like we hear, get help as soon as you can. If it's for yourself or for a loved one, mental illness can happen to anybody, and we have to continue to break the stigma around it.